Hi,
Hey.
I'm State Representative Carolyn Tomei, and you're watching Milwaukee Today. Only this is really Milwaukee yesterday. I have a couple of wonderful guests today. We're continuing a program that we'd started from last week. I have Jean Johnson and Lillie Moore joining me, and we're happy that you've joined us today. We're continuing. We're talking about the Ardenwald neighborhood and Johnson Creek Boulevard and the history that these two ladies have with Milwaukee. So thank you so much for coming back again.
Thank you.
Last week we were talking about the community center, and I've got a picture here, the Dogwood Lodge that was built by people in the community. And
Yes,
you mentioned
it was
that the
all
Graffs,
volunteer help.
right? The Graffs built that. What street is that on?
That's on Roswell,
Roswell.
just across from Ardenwald School.
Right. And so that was built about in what year?
Oh, let's see, it was built, not what year, several years, but they started in the mid-40s.
Mid-40s. Okay, after the
Maybe
war
a
then?
little- Yeah.
After
Oh,
the
it
war.
was after the war, right after that. Because while the war was still going on, you couldn't buy any materials to build anything at all. And as I said earlier, that you could only build a double garage or a basement.
And
if
that's
you
where you
wanted a place
lived
to
when you
live.
were building your house during the war. You and your family lived in the basement, right?
Yes, for about
With two
4
kids.
years.
Yeah.
And then we started going up. Oh, one funny thing about that, this one night we were putting on the shingles on the roof of the house. And we had my husband had cut back a little ways on the side so that he could get the studding in for the upstairs on top of the basement there. And so we were in bed this one night, and about 5:30 in the morning it began pouring down rain, and a lot of the rain was right over where our bed was. So we jumped up quickly and got every pan, bucket, wash tub we could find and put them out right by each other. The only dry spot in the place was the furnace room, which didn't have any furnace at that time, but nobody was in there. That was the one bad thing. But I belonged to a church club, and we were going to have a tea that afternoon. So after we got all the buckets and everything in place, you couldn't move very far, but I decided I'd better go ahead and make some of these fancy cookies with all of these pots of water.
Oh my goodness.
So I made all of those cookies, and I didn't go to the tea. I went up, when it stopped raining a bit, I went back up and started putting some more shingles on. That was something that someone that wasn't very good as a carpenter could do. You could just pound the nails in them.
Oh, that's great, Jean. So the community center eventually had to be torn down, right?
Yes, because they had a lot of rules that they put in, and the community club just didn't fit any of them.
Right.
For instance, the bathroom was not large enough for a wheelchair. You have to have
Right.
a wheelchair be able to turn around.
Yeah.
And there were quite a few things that didn't come up to code.
Right.
And they decided that rather than trying to spend all the money to bring it back up, they'd just get rid of it.
Right.
So they tore it down.
And so we have a picture here, and I'm going to mark it number 12. I already did. And it shows what is there now. The first picture shows the lodge, a Dogwood Lodge, and this one shows the park, which is a lovely park that is there now.
In the summertime, in August, they have different bands come in and play
Right.
every Thursday night of the
evening.
week.
Right.
Why, people come and bring their lunches and spread out.
Parents and kids and
Yeah, all
dogs.
the, well,
It's a great
they
thing.
are trying to cut back on the dogs some and see that they are watched after.
Right, yeah, that can be
But-
sort of a bother.
Anyway, it is a lovely community thing and brings everybody together that way.
It is, it's wonderful. Talk some again about Grandpa Tideman Johnson. When did he come first to
Well, they
Oregon?
came from Wisconsin in 1899, I think. 1899, about that. And they settled right on 40 acres there.
On Johnson Creek
And
Boulevard.
on Johnson Creek Boulevard, but they built a kind of a log cabin. And the first thing we did when we got there, because they had built our house in 1914, the one that we're living in now, we just, Kenny, and with the help of
And Kenny
Lou's,
is
my husband,
Okay.
and with the help of Steve, who was only 10 or 12 years old, started tearing down the old shack. It was kind of a log cabin. And alas, part of the wood frame around the door fell on Kenny. It didn't hurt him bad, it hurt his feelings, and it wounded his pride, shall we say. But then we managed to tear that down, and there's houses built there now.
So you sold off quite a bit
Yeah,
of the
we
property.
sold off quite a bit. We had about 40 acres to sell.
Right.
And as a price, we got the use of the house to live in, which was great because he just finished he was teaching in high schools around. He ended up teaching at Lewis and Clark.
And how long did he teach at Lewis and Clark?
33 years.
And that was Ken Johnson, Kenneth Johnson, 33
Right.
years at Lewis and
Yeah.
Clark. And he also taught at Milwaukie High.
Yes, he did. He taught at he taught at Coquille and Milwaukie.
And what did he think about the students in
Oh,
Milwaukie?
he thought they were great. And I tell you, they were so different from the logging community that he started teaching, and he was not a disciplinarian. He was a philosopher. And he expected them to listen to him talk philosophy, and it didn't work. And he spoke very highly of the kind, sweet kids at Milwaukie, and he was happy to get there. But then he got a job at Lewis and Clark, and that was more to his liking.
Now, Tideman Johnson, did he farm the area? Is that why he came to Milwaukie?
No, both Kenny's grandfather and father were railroad men. They worked down at the Brooklyn Yards, and they both were down at the railroad. And then the nephew who lived there before we moved there also worked there. He was a railroad man, so it was very close to go. And Tideman often walked to work. Was able
Down
to
at the
do
Brooklyn
that.
Yards,
Yeah.
really?
Mhm.
Now, how many children did Tideman have?
Tideman, let's see, he had one.
Just one.
One boy.
And that was your husband's father?
Well, no, let me see. He had, I can't remember how many he had, but he had, there were just my husband and another male grandchild, and
Okay.
so.
Okay. And so your husband grew up on that property?
Yeah.
And his
Well,
brother?
they lived in Brooklyn, right at the end of the Ross Island Bridge. But he met, and one of the first times I went out with him, we went after a dance. He wanted to show me where his family lived. I wasn't even engaged to him at the time, and I was just enchanted. We went wading in Johnson Creek at 10 o'clock at night.
Oh, how romantic.
Yeah. And at one time before that, I was going to St. Helens Hall Junior College. with a friend who lived in Eastmoreland, and she said, well, we can go over to this nice park over here, but watch out for old man Johnson. That was Kenny's uncle. And she had been kicked out of the place by him. He was a surly old fellow, but he was nice, but just overextended, you know.
Right.
So the first thing I saw was being kicked out of the place that I now call my own.
And I want to talk some about Tideman Johnson Park, but first I want to get over to Lillie. Reminded me when we were talking about dances, this is a wonderful house. Now, where is this house?
This is the one at the end of Tacoma Street and 32nd, just before you cross that bridge. And by the way, you were talking about this bridge that goes over there, and that land that it was on belonged to one of the Wills, and they made quite a bit of money selling that land to whoever buys something like that. When they wanted to put this railroad through out to Estacada,
Yeah,
out that way.
Casadera.
Oh,
Yeah, going
that
to
was
Casadero.
the trolley line.
When
that went out there.
PGE was building a dam out there, why they wanted to have a railroad to
Out that
get
way.
back and forth.
Now, this is the Kane House, and 32nd and Tacoma, so it's on the west side of the bridge that crosses over the...
Well, it just practically even with the bridge. I mean,
Okay.
the bridge could go right into their...
Oh, into their house.
There.
Okay, and this is a beautiful home, and it's still there, correct?
Yes.
And tell us about what happened on the top floor.
Well, Margaret used to tell about when they would go dancing up there. The third floor was evidently, it looks here like it wasn't too big. I don't know just how big it was, but anyway, they'd have dances there. And during that time, there wasn't too much entertainment. Not too many people had TVs or radios.
Well, no
They were-
TVs in those
They
days.
hadn't invented it.
Well, our friends, the Dawsons, he was worked for the telephone company, and he got the first TV of anybody around. We'd go over at their place and watch them. But anyway, there was nothing like that. That's why so many things happened at the school. They'd have potlucks and
And had card
all-
parties, that kind of
yes,
thing, right?
all kinds of things.
So they had dances on the top floor of this beautiful house, right?
The dances were the young people. Older people didn't get it. Of course, back in those days, Jean and I were rather young people. We were newly married.
We were in our 20s, weren't we?
Yes.
Just little kids.
Yeah, that's great. That's a beautiful home.
Ardenwald has a lot of lovely houses in there, and they've been so well kept up.
Yes, and there's a great book here that we have that I'm just going to sort of hold up. The History of Ardenwald, Taped Oral Interviews of Longtime Residents. And this is available, I'd assume, for people to see. We're not going to be showing too much of this on television, but it is an available book, and I'm sure that this is in the Historical Society. A great idea. This was done in the year 2000. And I think the Neighborhood Association did this.
Yes,
Yes, Lillie
yes, they did.
Yes. That's
Pat
great.
McKinney was the one who did the writing of it, but we have pictures of many of these lovely old homes, and it's surprising how well they've been kept up.
Yes, yes.
And I had all those pictures.
That's, yes, wonderful pictures in here. So if people are interested in that, they'd be able to get it maybe by calling you or by going to the Historical Society.
They would need to call me. And one interesting thing is the high school printed all of this.
Right.
Cadre.
Cadre. Milwaukie High School.
At Milwaukie High School. I worked with them getting this printed, and I'd go to them and order copies made up
Right.
as we needed them.
That's wonderful.
And they are available to buy if people want to, but we don't, nobody made a cent of money on these books. We aren't pushing them, but we have sold quite a few by people who have seen one, have gotten ones for their family.
Yes, they're wonderful. Jean, I want to get back a little bit to Johnson Creek. The Johnson Creek was not named after your family. From who was it named?
Well, it was named after a person named William Johnson who owned a mill downstream, and that's all I know.
Okay.
But I have to say no, it was not named after us because it was already named from this William Johnson,
Right.
who was a pioneer, and he was in the generation before my husband's grandfather. So
Before Tideman. Okay.
Before
Now
Tideman.
tell us a little bit about Tideman Johnson Park. We haven't talked yet about that. Now Tideman Johnson Park is across the creek from your property, so it's on the north side of the creek, on the Portland side.
On the Portland side.
Right. So
And
tell us
it's-
about that.
Well, when we moved in there, my husband thought we should get rid of some of the property.
And why was that?
Well, it was burdensome. Motorcyclists and
Motorcycles would ride through the park and make a lot of
make
noise.
a lot of noise, and I kept calling and telling them to quiet down, and it to no avail. So we decided to give the city 4 acres.
The city of Portland?
The city of Portland, because that's where the property is. So that was a great relief, and it became just a walking park. They didn't put any equipment in or else. So, and it's a lovely nature spot.
Yes.
And there are birds and small animals like muskrats and beavers. The beavers are the bane of my husband's son's life. They build dams and it brings trouble.
Right. It does.
But it worked out fine. But one other thing I meant to mention is that the schools did not cooperate with us. I could have sent my children over to Milwaukie. No, I had to send them to Dunaway. And that meant that it was too far for them to walk. It was quite a ways. But if they'd been going to the Milwaukie schools, it would have worked out fine. But in those days, nowadays they can go to almost any school they want to. But in those days, I went down to the superintendent and tried to talk him in. I said, it's just a short walk for my kids to walk.
Ardenwald School, right?
And Milwaukie, but they had to go to Dunaway, which they turned out to like very much. And then.
But they had probably to take a bus there, right?
Oh yeah. Well.
No buses.
That's another story. Yeah. In those days, we didn't have 2 cars, mine and his, and so. Kenny bought me a cute little Model A Ford. And by that time, we had neighbors across the street who had 2 children, and I had 2 in school. And I tell you, we were packed into that funny little car. He finally bought me a better car, as 2 family cars.
Right.
So it was a problem.
Sure.
But
and that's because you were in
because
Portland
we were in
rather than Milwaukie.
Yeah. And they didn't have facilities for, even if we had paid for tuition, they couldn't do it or wouldn't do it.
Right. Oh, that's
so
a shame.
it was kind of a problem. And then when they got home, they didn't know any classmates around them.
Because they were all across the
we
creek.
weathered that all right.
Good. We have about 6 minutes. So I want to talk a little bit more about your family. Now, we've mentioned Steve is your son, and you also have 2 daughters, correct?
Right.
And who are they?
Well, there's Nancy and Judy. And Judy is a financial arranger for the Key Bank. and has a good job.
And Judy's last name is
It is now Hetrick.
Hetrick, okay.
And she has 2 children, a boy and a girl. They're both in their teenagers now. And Nancy has worked out at the airport for several years, and she has 4 kids.
And her last name is?
Well, I can't remember right now.
It'll come back to you.
It'll
That's
come
okay.
back.
Right, that's okay.
What is her name?
It'll come back.
Nancy Fennern.
Fennern.
See, I knew it would come back.
Right. I have these little senior moments, little parts of my brain that aren't functioning.
That's what I am having trouble with. Yeah.
And your husband taught at Lewis and Clark for 33 years, and you worked for?
Portland Teachers Credit Union.
For how many years?
Oh, 33 years.
33 years.
About 30 years, yeah.
Right.
I went to work when, during the beginning of the Korean War, when many of the teachers were told to go get their doctorate, which my husband didn't have. He had started his doctorate, but he didn't finish it because they needed teachers.
Sure.
So then all of a sudden they needed him. So, but first I went to work so that he could get his degree. And then the war was over and they asked him to come back. They needed teachers then, so he went back, and I quit. I was working full-time then,
right,
for Portland Teachers Credit Union.
And that's when you walked across the bridge?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
And Lillie, I'm sorry. Lillie, you have a family. Tell us about your family.
Well, I have 3 children. Glenn, who is a musician, and at the present time he's over in Europe.
Oh.
He goes over there every year for a time or two. They do tours around. He belongs to the group
Oregon.
Oh, I didn't know that. What does he play?
He plays the string bass.
And he
piano.
is great. He's great.
Now this is sort of jazz, right?
Yeah, it is jazz.
That is a great group.
And he
I
plays a
didn't know
mean
that.
piano too.
Wow,
Oh,
that's wonderful.
well, he'd been all over the United States, and in fact, Oregon went on a tour once that the government sent them on to the different army bases and things, and they went back in the far east for some of the places, and at that time the people weren't too fond of the Americans. What's new now?
Right, yes.
But they did have their drummer had been killed in an auto accident in Germany a few years before that, and they had to get this other fellow, and he was from India, this drummer, and his mother was a very famous person in India, so they made it sound like it was his band, this fellow's, the son's band, but it wasn't. When he gets back from Europe, which is the end of the month, he'll have time to change his clothes and then go to Hawaii, and he's done these seminars in playing bass and jazz, and he's going to conduct one of those over there.
Wonderful.
Wouldn't it be awful to have to go to Hawaii
I know.
to work?
I can't
He
imagine.
just feels that way. but
Especially in the spring.
he-
Shame.
He makes himself enjoy it.
Now,
Yeah.
Lillie, you taught for some years.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, after my children were all in school, they were starting to build new schools in Milwaukie, and so they were building a new junior high out at, it was Dale Icka's Junior High. Well, actually, they named it first Harmony because there was Harmony grade school, and we got to use their gym the first 2 years. We didn't have one in our school, but anyway, we had this Well, anyway.
What did you teach?
I taught home economics.
Ah, and how many years did you teach?
I taught 20.
20 years.
20
In the
years.
middle school,
Yes.
junior high school called them in
Yes.
those days. That's great. And you have, and besides your one son, you just have the one son?
No, I have 2 sons, but I have a daughter that comes next.
Okay.
She's a pharmacist.
Ah,
And, well, I might say that of my grandchildren, Glenn is my oldest son, and he has 2 sons that are both captains in the Army,
ah,
and one's in Korea right now, and one's in Texas. And they're both of them working with other people, training.
ah. We have about
Right
2
now.
more minutes. Tell me about
Okay.
your daughter. What is her name?
Roberta,
And her last
and-
name?
born, B-O-R-N, just
Okay.
like you were born.
Okay.
And she's a pharmacist. And she has a son that graduated from the Air Force Academy. And he is a pilot and has flown all over the world, really gotten around. And one of the oldest son is a doctor.
And where
No.
does he practice?
Well, he is still finishing up school. He's an MD, but you know they specialize. He's
Sure.
going to be a kidney doctor.
At
And so
OHSU? Is that where he's studying? At Oregon Health University?
No, he's in Utah,
Ah, good.
in Salt Lake.
Great. I think our time is up, ladies. Thank you so much for being willing to meet with us for 2 weeks. We've learned a lot of history of Milwaukee and of your family history. Thank you for joining us. I'm Representative Carolyn Tomei, and I've had as my guest today Jean Johnson and Lillie Moore. We've been learning about the history of Milwaukee. You've been watching Milwaukee Today, which is also Milwaukee Yesterday. And I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.